Great Wordsmiths of History.
Most of us have people in our lives who can make any topic interesting. At the very least, we have all read books or poems by inspiring authors. What makes them such great wordsmiths? Words are some of the most interesting things in the world, and we use them every day. According to some sources, we will each speak over 860 million words by the end of our lifetimes. Even though we use words every day, we don't usually think about how important they are to us. To say what we want to say means choosing the right words. It means putting them in the right order. By choosing the right words, we communicate rich and specific information. More importantly, we build worlds for the people listening to us. Let's look at some of the greatest wordsmiths in history to see what made them original thinkers and writers.
Sappho, the ancient poetess.
Sappho was an ancient Greek poet, born circa 610, died circa 570 BCE. Ancient Greece is sometimes considered the birthplace of Western culture. Ancient Greeks were crucial to the development of philosophy, thinking about the big questions such as what is the meaning of life, and the concept of democracy, in which people participate in government by voting for their leaders. Because Sappho lived so long ago, not a lot is known about her life. She was born on the island of Lesbos, which is now in Greece. She had 2 brothers and a daughter called Clace, whom she wrote about in one of her poems. There are many legends about Sappho. According to one, she married a rich man named Cercleus. According to another, she fell in love with a young sailor named Phaon. In this legend, she threw herself from a cliff because Phaon didn't love her back. Whatever the truth of these stories, Sappho remains the greatest female poet of the ancient world. Sappho wrote often about women. She might have been writing for the community of women who lived in her area. In particular, she wrote about love and marriage. Many of these poems would have been recited in public, perhaps by groups of people. What made Sappho's poetry so great? Sappho's poems give a lively sense of her personality and passion. Her poems are usually very personal. They contain rich imagery and a sense of majesty, flowers and outdoor scenes, perfumes to sprinkle on the body and in the hair, ivory and bracelets. Most of all, they include lots of emotion, especially pain and humor.
Sleep, darling. I have a small daughter called Claes, who is like a golden flower. I wouldn't take all Crease's kingdom with love thrown in for her. From Claes. William Shakespeare, the Bard.
Another famous wordsmith is William Shakespeare, approximately 1564 to 1616. Many people think he was the greatest writer in history. Shakespeare lived in England and wrote plays for King's Men, a famous theater group at the time. Not much is known about Shakespeare's life. He married, had children, and bought property. He eventually retired to the country where he died. Still, Shakespeare lived in a time of upheaval. England was changing rapidly, and these changes no doubt provided material for much of his work. Shakespeare wrote many poems called sonnets. He is most famous for his plays. Some of these were comedies like As You Like It. They were filled with funny coincidences and wordplay. Others were tragedies like Hamlet and Romeo and Juliet. These were bleak plays that usually had sad endings. Many of the main characters died. Shakespeare's work contains many examples of beautiful language, from original metaphors and similes to striking imagery. Shakespeare even invented many words that we still use today, such as gloomy and cold-blooded.
But soft, what light through yonder window breaks? It is the east, and Juliet is the sun. Arise, fair sun, and kill the envious moon, who is already sick and pale with grief, that thou, her maid, art far more fair than she.
From Romeo and Juliet. Emily Dickinson, the secluded genius.
Emily Dickinson, 1830 to 1886, was a reclusive poet who some consider to be the greatest American poet of the 19th century. Dickinson grew up in the northeastern United States. Her parents thought her health was poor, so she often stayed home from school. Still, she was a brilliant student and had wide interests. After studying botany, she grew her own herbs. Like most of the family, she was quirky and eccentric. She started writing poetry when she was a teenager, but during her 20s, she mostly wrote letters. She lost many of her friends, and she seemed to be afraid that people would leave her. She was very close to her siblings and never married. She was solitary by nature, and as she got older, spent more and more time alone. Toward the end of her life, she lived in almost total seclusion. Most of her poetry was not published until after her death. Dickinson wrote about many of the concerns that people felt during the 19th century, such as spirituality, nature, and art. Her poetry was very different from anything written before. Earlier poetry tended to rhyme, to be very elaborate, and to follow the rules of grammar. Dickinson often broke these rules. She used dashes instead of commas. She also capitalized many of the nouns inside her poems. Most importantly, she wrote in a simple and condensed style.
I'll tell you how the sun rose, a ribbon at a time. The steeples swam in amethyst, the news like squirrels ran. The hills untied their bonnets, the bobolinks begun. Then I said softly to myself, that must have been the sun. From I'll Tell You How the Sun Rose. The Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King, Jr., the civil rights leader.
Not all wordsmiths are writers. Some are public speakers. They use the spoken word to communicate their ideas and to describe the world. One of the most famous speakers was the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King, Jr., who fought for civil rights in the United States in the 1960s. King suffered from racism as a child. He did not allow this to keep him from reaching his goals. King grew up to become a minister. When he studied religion as a young man, he learned about the Indian leader Mahatma Gandhi and his ideas about non-violent protest. These ideas influenced King throughout his life. During the 1960s, King organized many nonviolent protests. Probably his most famous speech took place during the 1963 March on Washington, D.C. There, King gave what is now called the "I Have a Dream" speech, in which he insisted that one day all people would live as brothers and sisters. I have a dream that one day this nation will rise up and live out the true meaning of its creed. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal. I have a dream that one day on the red hills of Georgia, the sons of former slaves and the sons of former slave owners will be able to sit down together at the table of brotherhood. I have a dream that my 4 little children will one day live in a nation where they will not be judged by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character. I have a dream today. From I Have a Dream.
Discuss. What is the main idea of this text, and what examples does the author give to support it?